Hello, everybody. Welcome to the September Whiskey Club virtual tasting for the Eureka Whiskey Club. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm excited to talk to our special guest, Harlan Wheatley from Buffalo Trace. Tonight, we will be talking about all things Weller, specifically Old Antique 107, which we did a barrel pick of this month. So as always, please make sure you're putting your questions in the comment section, and we will get to your questions at the end of the call here. And as always, we'll pick two winners for the call. A couple of great prizes that Harlan and his team have given us to give away this evening. The first place winner will get a signed Buffalo Trace barrelhead signed by Harlan, and then also a Buffalo Trace kind of swag bag. And the second place winner will also get the signed barrelhead as well. No swag bag, but still a really cool, unique, one-of-a-kind autographed barrelhead from the master distiller himself. So hope we have some good questions tonight. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm looking forward to getting into this pick. And Harlan, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. I'm sure many people, if not all people, know who you are. But for those that don't, feel free to give us a quick synopsis of who you are and what you do at Buffalo Trace.
Well, I'm Harlan Wheatley, and I'm the master distiller for really the Sazerac Company, and Buffalo Trace is our flagship distillery. That's where we make. I think the last count was about 48 different bourbons. One of the things we try to keep our philosophy pretty simple, and we focus on variety, and we focus on delivering the best taste we can for each one of those varieties. So we have about 12 different. We've expanded quite a bit the portfolio, but we've got about 12 different recipes that we're making, and we're also everywhere I go. Generally, most people say we need to make more whiskey, and they'll go to liquor stores or wherever they're at, and they have a hard time finding our stuff sometimes, which we did tell people that was going to happen. But anyway, they wherever we would go, they always say we need more whiskey. So we chartered down that road several years ago, and we're in the middle of a $200 million expansion at Buffalo Trace, where we basically mimicked everything we have, duplicated everything, so we can make more whiskey. And we're pretty excited because we're going to fire all this up in 2023 and be able to put away a lot more than we are now. And the whole
Yes,
time we go ahead.
I think the gap between I was in at Buffalo Trace back in March, but previous to that, I hadn't been there in I think like 5 or 6 years, and it just in that short amount of time, it just looked completely different. You know, obviously there were things that that looked the same, but yeah, the expansion that you guys have done is pretty insane. I mean, the visitor center and so all those rick houses kind of across the road there. Are those? Is that what you're talking about as far as what's kind of are those holding whiskey right now, or is that is what is being done in 2023?
No, we're building them. We're building our storage warehouses for barrels, literally as fast as we can build them. They're each one 58,800 barrels each. It costs us about $10 million to build each one, and we're building right now 5 a year, and that's just part of it. We also built a brand new still house that includes stills. Right, we're up to 11 stills on site now, and then we built a brand new $50 million dry house because after we distill everything, we gotta have something to do with all the spent beer and things. But so we're just expanding to the point to maximize the location, and we're going to get so many trucks a day, and it's literally as big as we can put on the banks of the Kentucky,
How
And
many? What's the? I mean, I know you said that people are always asking you make more whiskey. What's the anticipated increase as far as how much more is going to be able to be held and be produced with all this expansion?
well, we're immediately going to double.
Oh
So
wow,
come January 23, we'll immediately distill double. And we're privately held, so we don't really talk exact numbers, but we're literally doubling our size. So that's what I was talking about with the warehousing. We've got to continue to build. We'll be out of land in Frankfurt where we are now in about a year, and so we bought another farm down next to our barrel company, close to our barrel company, and we're going to be putting barrels away beside them. So it actually works out pretty nice because they'll bring the barrels up the Buffalo Trace, we'll fill them, and then we'll double haul them back to the storage warehouse. So, but we're continually expanding, and there's no plans of stopping. And that's kind of the name of the game for quite some time into the future.
that's awesome. And for those that have been members for a while, I think Harlan joined us about a year and a half ago. So, but we're super excited to have him back. Harlan, for the new members that we have, could you just maybe give a quick synopsis of your history at Buffalo Trace and kind of your background and how you started and
Yep.
how you ended up becoming the master distiller?
Well, at Buffalo Trace, at least we kind of do things more on the traditional side, and I graduated with a chemical engineering degree and a chemistry degree. I did dual degrees and two different colleges. University of Kentucky was my chemical engineering degree, um, and I wanted to stay close to home. Frankfurt and Buffalo Trace at the time. This is in 1994 when I was getting out of college, and I looked around, and for a chemical engineer, I either had to go to Texas for the fuel business, or we had a Ashland Oil or Eastman Kodak in Tennessee. Just a few. There weren't a lot of great jobs like there are now. There are jobs everywhere, it seems like. But anyway, we had one opening, in a distillery in Kentucky. Back then, there was 7 or 8 distilleries making all the bourbon. Right? It wasn't. Now there's 2,300 distilleries. So things have changed quite a bit over the last 2.5 decades. But anyway, I came in working as a distillery supervisor under the distiller at the time, Gary Gayhart, and I worked for him for 10 years and just kind of learned on the job, all the ins and outs of the distillery and the facility that we have and how to make whiskey there, and how we specifically make whiskey because we do a little bit of each thing we do is a little bit different than others, right? But anyway, it was awesome training from Gary, and I was very happy to have a pretty close relationship with Elmer T. Lee as well.
Oh wow.
Elmer was still floating around, even though he was retired. He did a lot of PR for us, and I did a lot of personal. We went fishing and golfing, and I got to know him pretty close. And I asked him a ton of questions, right, about the distillery and all the production. And the guy was just full of knowledge. He'd been in the distillery business since World War II, and all around me, I had nothing but a bunch of veterans. So I was very lucky to have that, and learned on the job. So I took over after Gary retired in 2005, and been there ever since. Well, again, the landscape has changed quite a bit since I started. I mean, like I say, we were looking for work back then, and we had 50 people in the company total, and now we have 5,000. So again, that's happened over 2.5 decades.
Yeah.
It does feel fast to me.
Well, in 2005, I was in college, probably drinking Black Velvet out of a plastic plastic bottle somewhere.
Yeah.
But so you talked about having a chemical engineering background. What would you say as far as if you were to estimate what percentage of your job, is focused on and uses that chemical engineering degree versus what percentage is more like feel or, relying on your palate or, because I'd imagine you use both pretty heavily, but is it a 50-50 split, or what do you feel, or does it depend on the day? Does it depend on the week, what you're doing? I'm just curious on kind of how that divides up.
I have had time to think about that question because I've had it a few times over the years. And the answer is that what has happened when you first start out, you rely on everything you've learned, right? You've got an engineering background, you know why pumps do what they do, why fermenters do what they do, why the still's designed the way it is, why things happen the way they do. And then over time, as you develop the experience, it does become more of a feel. And that's, I think, where the art comes into play, is because, I can literally walk up to a still and kind of know what to do with it, right? And those things, my timer went off. Hold on.
You're all good.
Motion. But anyway, those things, that's kind of the way it is over time. You develop the feel and the art for the business. I think it's important to have that, understanding from the technical aspect, so you don't make as many mistakes, and you can understand when things are not going the way they're supposed to. But the feel comes into play quite a bit, and it's very helpful with to have that experience.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit since the featured whiskey this month is the Weller 107. Can you give us a brief history of the Weller brand and who W.L. Weller was, and kind of the acquisition of Buffalo, the history of how Stitzel Weller became Buffalo Trace?
Well, that one is, if people don't know the story, the thing about the Weller label for us, we actually was producing that recipe before we owned it. We were contracting with Stitzel Weller to produce it there because, again, back in, we actually started making the first batch, I think was in 1989. And it was shortly before I started. But I remember in the early days, again, we didn't have business. So, if somebody needed some bourbon made, we had the capacity. We were running at the time about 3% capacity. And it's a huge distillery, but we weren't running it very hard. So we were making it, putting the barrels away in the warehouse and storing it for them. And then they would, of course, take it when they needed it. And then along came the opportunity for us to purchase the label along with the old charter label. That was in 1997. And in 1997, that was easy for us because we already had the aged inventory already in our warehouse. So it was a beautiful thing. And the funny part of that story was they said, "Do you need the recipe for the Weller?" And I said, "No, we've been making it, every year. So we're good on the recipe, even though they did give us the recipe." And, we've just been making it ever since. It's one that, for us, it really turned the tables for us. When I talk about variety, we've got rye whiskey, rye bourbons, all different ages, all different types, but we didn't really have that wheated bourbon. And then when we got this label, it gave us that other recipe, that other variety. And we're able to do it a little different by aging it up, right? We've got, like you say, the antique and the special reserve, which basically starts off life at about 7 years old, 90 proof, and then goes all the way to the Weller. Really, the William LaRue Weller is our kind of the top of the line part of our antique collection. But we added some recently. We've extended that label, which everybody is pretty excited about. We did the Craft Your Perfect Bourbon, and that was basically kind of an experiment. We put that out. We put a website out, and we told people to pick what they thought that they would like, and at the end of the day, it came out with this weeded, not about a 9-year-old weeded upper floor bourbon. And so we just said we'll call it the Craft Your Perfect Bourbon, and we'll put it out there for people to enjoy. Of course, the 12-year-old, and then we did a full proof recently, which just means we put it in the bottle the same proof that we put it away in the warehouse, 114. And then we also did a Weller single barrel now, and everybody knows the stories on single barrels, but it's just a good way to really display the quality one barrel at a time, right? And and just like these barrel picks, which I believe is what everybody's tasting, that those are basically single barrels. That people come in and select barrels based on their taste preference. What's great about that is there's ownership, right? The people that are tasting feel ownership, and they know what the barrel tastes like, and it's a great experience.
Yeah, you touch on the popularity of barrel picks, and you and I were talking about this, offline, and I thought it was maybe something our members would find interesting. Can you kind of talk about how the popularity of these barrel picks has grown over the years, and kind of how it's affected, Buffalo Trace? You tell me you had one person on it a few years ago, and now how many people do you have?
Well, I've lost track. I think we're up to about 5 or 6 different people, managing the sales and planning for the barrel. We call it the single barrel select program, where you come in and, like I say, customers come in and select barrels, or we have the option of shipping samples to certain, if the customer qualifies to buy the barrel, then we ship those samples out and they pick the barrel. But we basically, we were one of the first, if not the first, to do this program. And then, we would do 10 barrels, 20 barrels, just slow growth. And again, over probably, I don't know when we started. I'm going to guess around 15 years ago or so. And it's grown to thousands. We're doing thousands of barrels a year, and we've got a select few barrels that we can offer, obviously, but we've got a pretty good selection of the Weller, and then we do the Buffalo Trace, of course, and the Blantons, and just different ones. You'd have to look at. We have a website, Single Barrel Select, I believe it is. You probably know that, but you can get on there and check that out.
Yeah, no, for sure. I wanted to go back to the Craft Your Perfect Bourbon. I think that was 2018 when that came out. Does that sound about right?
Sounds about right.
Are you guys? Is there any plans or talk about? Has that recipe remained the same since the release? And are there any plans of maybe doing a round 2 where it's polling again and seeing what people's preferences would be a second time? Or
well, that's a good question. I haven't talked to the brand teams about that lately, but I don't think that we're planning to do that. The funny story on that, I'm in front of a group in Texas one time, and I'm doing a tasting in front of, we're talking about stuff, and they said, why don't you offer Blanton's barrel proof in the U.S. and you ship it across the ocean? And I said, well, we don't really have any plans of doing that because we don't have enough barrels to go around and all the things that are true. And then this guy in the back raises his hand. He said, I just read a press release that says you just released it in the U.S. So sometimes the brand teams do things and don't tell me about it. But I don't think we're planning to redo that for now. It's definitely a good idea to keep continually polling and see what people think. But right now the recipe's still the same, and like I said, it's a wheated bourbon. We chose based on what they picked, and they did pick upper floors, and I believe it was 8 or 9 years old, and it's still really good variety of our Weller lineup.
Is there anything, if it were Harlan's Create Your Perfect Bourbon, is there anything you would have done differently than obviously whatever you released, I'm sure had your seal of approval on it.
Oh yeah.
If I guess if the power were 100% in your hands, would you have tweaked anything with that?
Well, that's
bourbon.
That the fun part about the website was that people that have never been involved with bourbon production at all can pick things right based on just what they think. For me, I'm cheating a little bit, right? Because I know what the outcomes are going to be. But I do like, from a weeded standpoint, my favorite is about a 12 years old. I mean, that to me is, I do like maturity. I like a little bit extra on the barrel, a little bit more tannins and caramels and things from the barrel. So a 12 to 15-year-old weeded bourbon for me is right on the money. And but generally on a daily basis, I drink rye bourbon because I just like that extra little spice, a little extra flavor, and I use Buffalo Trace in cocktails. That's my favorite. We designed it from scratch, right? So that's why it is the way it is. Um, but it's the most versatile we have, and you can do anything you want with it. I do drink Eagle Rare on the rocks. That's kind of my favorite neat drink. But it's kind of like the old saying, picking children, right? They're all good for different reasons and different occasions. I mean, you whip out a bottle of George T. Stagg on a campfire, and everybody starts smiling and telling big stories, and can't beat it.
That's awesome. I'm curious on, you always hear the terminology of Weller being, what poor man's pappy. You always hear that terminology. I'm curious what the selection process, I'm sure that it's very complicated, but in a quick synopsis, how do barrels get, what are some determining factors for you when determining what barrels go to the Pappy line and what barrels go to the Weller line?
Well, it's kind of like a baseball team. You select the best players to try to put on the field, and as we are tasting, so we taste. I added up the last time. I think it was 7 times before it gets in the bottle, and we taste it straight off the still every single day. We taste after it ages for 12 months, then 24 months, 36 months, and 48 months, so 4 years. So we'll taste 5 times after sitting in the barrel for 4 years. And based on that tasting and testing, we do also analysis to make sure it's on track. We have trends and fingerprints of all of our whiskeys and all the locations that we have. And we have a huge variety of locations because some of our warehouses are 9 stories tall. And I think we're up to 37 warehouses now total. And at Buffalo Trace, I'm not even counting the storage we have at Bardstown and Owensboro. We also store barrels there. But so we do all that and we put it into our fingerprinting analysis and make sure it's on track. And if we think it's going to be good at 20 years, we'll hold those barrels all the way up until they're 20 years old. And we know based on the selection process what floors to go to, right? Because we know that we can't keep a 20-year-old at the top floor of the 9th floor of our warehouse because it'll basically evaporate. So we know which floors to hold them in. We know what style they should be for each of and we call it anticipated use. So if we know if it's a 23-year-old, for example, a second or third floor at a certain taste profile, and then that's the way it works.
Yes, I mean the Rick House to a certain extent is like a living entity. What places do what things, and
yep,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it depends a lot on the weather, weather and the environment and airflow, and there's a lot of factors.
What's it been like in Kentucky this year? I mean, we're having a pretty hot year out in California. I'm curious on what it's been like over there.
It's actually been a little wetter. We've had a really good all around year. It hasn't been super hot, so I'd say overall it's been good. One of the projects that we've been working on is part of our experimental program, where we monitor like warehouse X. We have these chambers where we can monitor temperature, humidity, airflow, and surface temperature, and which is sunlight. But we're in the middle of also monitoring temperature and humidity of all of our existing inventory. So we can actually go out and track millions of data points per barrel, right? When you say, what's the weather been like? I can actually pull a barrel and say, okay, this barrel's been exposed for 7 years with this average temperature, this average humidity, and so on. And it really paints a picture on what that whiskey's going to taste like when it's dumped.
What is the increased humidity due to the barrel typically?
Well, the humidity level is just as big a factor as the temperature, because obviously if you have a real humid environment, then you're going to have less extraction from the barrel and less interaction of the whiskey into the wood, and vice versa with temperature. If you have a hot temperature, right, it's going to drive it into the wood a lot more often. And our warehouses breathe, so it's really important. We've proven this, that it's really important to breathe. Then it'll go in and out and basically extract those flavors in those layers of wood. You know, you can get to the first layer pretty easily. The char layer is the easiest layer. But to get to those sub layers and really extract some of those really good caramel notes and vanillas, it takes time. So we've proven that you can't cheat Father Time. You can just stick it in there and get it hot as you want, but it takes time to extract that from those inner layers.
Well, I'm going to pour a little bit of this. It's been a few weeks, so I do want to share a quick story. I was a bit of a tragedy. I wish I could say I consumed this much of this bottle in the short amount of time I've had it, but the reality is, what?
Don't tell me you spilled it.
I did not spill it, but do you have any cats, Harlan?
No cats.
Good man. I call my cat my wife's cat. So my wife's cat got into my bar, and I turned around and heard a loud crashing sound, and 2 bottles fell. Luckily, the one that broke was nothing of huge significance, and then the other bottle that fell was this pick, and unfortunately, about a good 8 ounces spilled on the ground. So, if anybody needs a cat,
Right.
feel free to let me know.
Yeah.
I lost my mind for a moment there.
Maybe the cat drank some of the bourbon.
It could be possible. I wouldn't put it past this cat. He's a sweetheart, but he's definitely has a wild side. But anyways, I hope all our members were able to pour themselves a glass. And as always, in the comment section, please feel free to put your comments. We selected 6 different barrels for this pick, so they're all going to vary a little bit. The cards everyone received this month reflect the barrel I got and my tasting notes. So should be fairly common, but you may, one thing may stand out a little bit more than another. So again, if you want to put in your comments what your barrel tastes like or what your bottle's tasting like, and reflect on what other people are saying, I think that's always fun. But for me on this one, I get a huge black cherry and vanilla note on the nose that pops right out. A lot of wet oak, some cinnamon bark, and then the palate really follows the nose for the most part. But I think for those in the club, I always say this. I always kind of like to put desserts as tasting notes. So main thing I had here was a cherry pie with a graham cracker walnut crust, a little bit of cinnamon, clove, and obviously some caramel. The finish is pretty long for me. You know, that 107 proof, and I get notes of anise or black licorice, and then some cinnamon and mint on the tail end. Just overall phenomenal. I couldn't be more happy with the pick, and I hope that everyone else likes theirs. Harlan, I'm curious, you know, was there a specific reason for the 107 proof, or was that kind of it just came about because that's what everyone liked the best? When I'm not sure how old this recipe is or how long it's been on market.
The 107 was just the original recipe for that extension. And I don't know the history of when it started, but the um, the thing about the 107 for us has always been it's a balancing of the mild wheat and the alcohol that's in the bottle. So in other words, you can get the mild wheat, but then it's plenty of it with 107, and it's a balancing of that. With the wheat, one thing we know is it's a dominant grain. In other words, it dominates and it allows us to age it longer. You know, if you try to age for example, a rye whiskey more than we have an 18-year-old rye whiskey, and the older that stuff gets, the more it becomes really oaky. And with wheat, it actually ages gracefully, more gracefully, right? And we know that because of just the way the wheat.
And that has something to do with the protein structure of the grain. Based off things I've read, is that accurate?
Well, that's true, and you get different levels of um, esters based on those protein levels in those grains. And those esters are, of course, really important, to deliver balance when you're fermenting. And it's all related to the yeast as well, of course. Um, it's the whole package, just like what I was talking about at the beginning. It's how we cook, we pressure cook, how we ferment, how we distill. We have a 7-foot diameter column still that we use for our bourbons, and um, how we age. We have the oldest inventory in the business. People say, well, what's the outage of a 20-year-old barrel? And I said, well, we do know that because we're one of the few people that offer that. I mean, a 20-year-old barrel could run into a lot of problems along the way, right? You could have a lot of leaks. So it does depend on, how you treat the barrels.
And then, so this specific pick is non-chill filtered. I was hoping you could maybe talk about what exactly that means and how it affects the final product, in your opinion.
Well, non-chill filtered is a kind of a recent phenomenon because we only offered chill filtered forever, and the reason we picked chill filtered because originally in the early '90s we actually charcoal filtered, and the problem with charcoal filtering is, as you probably know this, but as it starts to strip a little bit of flavor from your bourbon, which is we're not all about that. That's the opposite of what you're trying to get accomplished. So we started chill filtering, and the purpose of chill filtering is it eliminates the haze that you get from a bourbon. It's the fatty acids that are in the bourbons, and you eliminate that with a chill filtration, and it makes it nice and clear. And it doesn't eliminate flavor, but it eliminates the kind of the look and the mouthfeel that you get. But we started probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago getting a lot of requests for this non-chill filtered version of different single barrels selects. And, we said, why not? If that's what they want, it's actually an easier process for us because we don't have to run it through our chill filters. And then you're getting everything there is out of that barrel. So if you're not careful, this is 107 proof, which makes it nice. But when you get below 100 proof and you add a little water to it, let's say it's 80 proof, and you stick that in a freezer, for example, it'll start to cloud up, and you'll see that. And that's, people like that mouthfeel and extra flavor that they're getting. So
Yeah, I think there's certain whiskeys where just in our restaurants, if the temperature is fluctuating, the non-chilled filtered, you'll start seeing kind of the I don't know what the
the
word
haze.
is, but yeah, they kind of form in clumps too
Yep.
in the whiskey. And I've had experiences with alcohol beverage control officers that have came into some restaurants and saying, "Oh, you got to throw this bottle away because there's they thought it was foreign substances in the whiskey." And I said, "Oh no, it's just
It's
the
part of it.
temperature fluctuation causes these these elements of the
Fatty
whiskey
acid.
bond together."
Yep.
But yeah, and from my experience, if you just shake the bottle really hard, they'll go away. But
Yeah.
I had a
Yeah.
specific instance with an ABC officer, with an alcohol beverage control officer, where he didn't quite understand what I was saying and made me throw away a bottle of whiskey that I didn't want to throw away. So
That's
luckily it
terrible.
wasn't anything super expensive, but
I hate to hear about that.
no, yeah, for sure. I do want to get into our questions. I do have one last question from me, and this was kind of something I started asking, I think, on a couple calls ago, based off of something that someone else would say. But I thought it was a fun thing because it's always easier to look back on things that maybe didn't go the way we wanted them to. I was wondering if you had one. What is your favorite disaster story from the distillery that you can look back and laugh at now, whether it be losing, spilling whiskey, or a fermenter going off, some kind of disaster story I'm sure you've had in your years that you can look back and laugh on now.
Well, I've got a few pictures. Nowadays, you've got digital pictures, right? But I've got a few pictures, like when we had a fermenter valve give way, and basically we had a maintenance operator go over and fix the valve. Well, when he did, of course, he got completely covered with beer out of the fermenter, and it looked like he took a shower with it. And we got a picture of him standing there looking like that. But we've got a lot of those type of pictures over the years. We pressure cook everything, and this was very scary. Could have been very, and like you say, we can look at it and sort of laugh now. But he opened it up while it was under pressure one time,
Oof.
and it blew the cook all the way to the top of the ceiling, and just basically raining mash everywhere in the cooker room. And luckily, he backed away enough to where he didn't get hurt. But we've had a lot of close calls like that over the years. I mean, we're trying to, as hard as we can, we're wide open trying to make bourbon and whiskeys, and you do run into things like that.
For sure. Cool. Yeah. Well, I think we can start getting into some questions from the group here, and choose our best two of the night. And
Yeah.
so, Brian, again, and as I always say, if I mispronounce your name, I am sorry. I will try my best. So, Brian Budell asks, with the period necessary to age, it will be late 20s to early 30s before available. I don't necessarily understand that question. Maybe it was just something we were talking about earlier. Sorry, Brian, if you want to elaborate on that, I'm not sure what you're referencing. Xander De Pascal asks, in your opinion, out of the 48 bourbons that you make, which is the most underrated and why?
Well, I guess we could think about each one, but the one that really kind of immediately pops to my mind is the Eagle Rare 17 in our antique collection. We for a lot of years put that out at 90 proof, and what we continually, the problem was it was up against George T. Stagg, William LaRue Weller, and the Thomas Handy, and all those are barrel strength, uncut and unfiltered, right? So when you're tasting along the lines, and you're getting 140 proof, 130 proof, and then we would taste the 90 proof. Uh, this is a 17-year-old rye bourbon. It is absolutely delicious, and you just didn't get the credit, I think. And so what we did about 3 years ago, we raised it up to 101, and it really made a pretty big difference because it allowed people to taste a little bit more of the bourbon and, kind of brought it up to the rest of them. So that's one that comes to mind for sure. We've got a lot of good ones, that we don't really make enough of for people to taste, but we've got Elmer T. Lee single barrel and Hancock's Reserve, which is a, really delicious single barrel, but we just don't make a lot of it.
Cool. Jeff Ziskin asks, with the expansion, do you anticipate there will be any more availability of the harder to find products, i.e. Weller, Rock Hill Farms, Blanton's, etc., or will it just be an increase in products such as Eagle Rare and Buffalo Trace?
Well, it's across the board. I can tell you that. We say every year, believe it or not, we're shipping more every year, and across the board, all the labels for the most part. I mean, we have some one-offs sometimes where the upper end we don't get a lot of yield or whatever the problems are, but generally we're making more of everything. And like I say, every year we've increased production. And we're doubling production about every 6 or 7 years, basically. And, we're getting ready to do a stair step when this new still comes online. And we're going to be, capable of putting out more bourbon at a single site than any bourbon distillery in the world, which is in the country. And there'll be no reason why we can't get it out there. It just takes time. And we can't, there it goes again. And then we can't cheat on time. So it just takes a little bit of time to get it out there.
Clark White asks, as a tried and true Kentucky native, speaking about you, Harlan, how has working at Buffalo Trace allowed you to give back to your community?
Well, that has been the fun part. We've done a few things. I do serve on the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Foundation. I've done that for about 25 years. And it's been one that I'm pretty passionate about. Its focus is, kids camps and conservation, of course, in the state, and all the different things that come about at the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife. So that's been a good one. And then we also do a lot of local charity work, with different about 12 or 13 different charities every year we focus on in Frankfort community. And then we've done some other things, like we recently planted 1,000 oak trees because we're working on the White Oak program. If you Google White Oak initiative and learn about that, of course it's a little bit of a selfish reason. We think white oak is an awesome tree, right? It makes all of our barrels, but it also speaks to conservation of white oak trees and how we manage those white oak trees. So there's a lot of things along those lines that we work on. So it's been great.
Awesome. Well, I said this earlier, so I depending on what your answer is, I don't want someone wants to know what your thoughts are on the term "poor man's Pappy" and if you think it's a compliment or a disservice to the Weller brand.
I don't know if it's a disservice, and I get it's a little bit of a joke on it's less expensive bourbon. It's more readily available. We have a lot more. Obviously, we have a lot more William LaRue Weller because it's easier to plan a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old or whatever we're making. So we have more of it, and it's more readily available. Easy, by the way, what we recommend, for example, what we recommend a Pappy 20 to sell for is probably not what it sells for. That's not the money that we get. That's the money that the retailer gets, right?
Yeah.
We recommend a couple $100 or whatever it is, and people sell it for 3,000 or 4,000 or whatever. So it's not us doing that, though.
Brian Yardley asks, I would love to hear about the culture of Buffalo Trace. What would you say you guys are about as a company apart from your whiskeys?
Well, that's a good question. And we're there's a couple things I'll say there. We have 650 employees on the site in Frankfort. And with down to the employee for the most part, right? If you walk through the site and spend about 2 or 3 hours talking to each person, the one common theme that you will see is pride. Every person there is extremely proud of the products that we're putting out. It's a true Kentucky product that the grains are grown, the corn is grown in Kentucky, and the barrels are produced in Kentucky, and we're of course putting it together and distilling and doing all that, and a lot of families and jobs there for Kentuckians. And so the pride is a really big piece for us. And then the other thing we say, it's basically our motto, is honor tradition and embrace change. And you'll see that throughout the facility. We've got buildings that were built in 1773, um, and we built our first warehouse in 1811, and we're still building warehouses, right? So we got them all the way up till last month, and so we got all the varieties of architecture and a lot of history there. So it's just kind of a fun place to be.
Nice, that's awesome. Matthew Archer asks, I've heard you may still like to experiment around the distillery with other processes/ingredients. What are your most recent, and what would you say have been the most impactful over the years?
Well, a perfect example, that's part of our experimental program. And our program encompasses recipe, distillation, really all facets of whiskey making, right? It's the environment, all the different aging and wood, and anything you can think of pretty much is on the list. And some of the best example that we have is our four grain. We started that off as an experiment, and we wanted to explore how we love the rye bourbon, we love the wheat bourbon, but what happens when you put them together, right? And so we put those together and made one. And as it aged, like I told you, we taste every 12 months basically. And as it was aging, we knew this thing was a hit. It was going to do well because it was good. It was everything you like about each one, all combined. And lo and behold, we put it under the E.H. Taylor label as a four grain, right? And it won the world's best whiskey. So that's just an exciting thing to bring from an experiment all the way to product line to, now it's a full-time product. We're going to release that every year, and we make it every year. It's part of it's part of the 12 recipes that we have. And, we've got a lot of those type of things in the warehouse that we're just super excited about. We've got about 3,600 barrels of different things in the warehouse that we're trying, and more to come on it.
Yeah, they failed to take me by that warehouse on the tour last time.
Yeah. They had to weigh you in and out, right?
Yeah. Dalton Burrows asked, do you think procuring the Weller label led to more wheat forward bourbons, or has that always been the direction?
Well, it certainly led to it because we didn't have any wheat in the inventory, so it definitely led to us exploring the different wheats, and we're doing that part of our experimental program. There's not just red winter wheat out there. There's a lot of other varieties, and we're looking at how does that wheat contribute and what does it do to the flavor of the whiskey. We're also doing that with corn and doing that with rye and doing that with all the different other grains. There's a lot of other grains out there. So, that's the fun part about bourbon. Within the rules of bourbon, right? You can explore different recipes and still call it a bourbon.
Cool. Frank Orlando says, which one factor do you think impacts the finished flavor profile of the bourbon the most?
Well, that's an easy one. It's the barrel. You can do all you want, but you can either ruin it or improve it or really deliver so much of the final flavor to the whiskey that the wood is probably the most. I've been asked that over the years. I give it a 50% influence of the final flavor because all the different things you can do. You can char it different. You can age it at different floors. It's kind of a combination of wood and environment, right? But that is really the most influential of the final flavor. Well, good example, perfect example of that is Eagle Rare and Buffalo Trace. That's the same exact recipe, right? Same type of barrel, same yeast, but we age it 2 more years for an Eagle Rare. And then when you taste those side by side, you're just getting a different, a different type of bourbon. And all we did was age it.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true that how big of an effect the barrel has. When we do our whiskey trainings, that's kind of what I stress the most to our teams is how big the barrel has an impact on the final flavor. This may be an easy one, but Jared Egley wants to know what's your favorite part of your job?
The favorite part is probably where the rubber meets the road, right? Where people like this. This is one of my favorite things is to be able to talk about the bourbon. You all give us feedback on what you're tasting and people enjoy the product. It's we're in the entertainment business. It's a serious product. It's regulated. It's something that you could abuse if you're not careful. So, but if it's treated properly with respect, like we recommend, right? Moderate drinking and enjoy the product with friends and family, and it's just a wonderful thing for us, and that's what's the most enjoyable to see all the hard work of all 650 people that we have, because every person matters in our process. And then at the end of the day, you get to enjoy it. It's fun.
It's always better to enjoy a nice whiskey, a nice meal, a nice anything with the people you care about. So
Absolutely. Yeah, you're never going to pop a good bottle of Eagle Rare with your enemies, right?
no, no. David, David Houghton or Houghton, sorry. Do you feel techniques such as bourbon being aged by music are really innovative, or just marketing gimmicks? I left
Well,
out the name of.
yeah, yeah, I've seen that, and there's a few out there, and each one is different. I'm not going to speak to it, but I know we don't age to music, other than just maybe if the operators wants to hear some. But there's different techniques out there for delivering different flavors. I think you should do the research. I think when you pick up a bottle on the shelf, kind of do the research who's making what, and you can kind of decide for yourself on it. But I do believe in the science side of it. Make sure that it's sound, right?
Well, this is not a question from the audience, but I guess if you were to play music for any of your barrels currently, what would they be listening to?
That's a good question. Bob Seger is kind of my favorite. Bob Seger Radio is kind of my favorite station, so I listen
Nice.
to that, and maybe maybe a little good variety, but that's kind of the stations I listen to.
Awesome. All right, we got a couple more here, then we can get to choosing. So Drew Hall says that a recent report says that there are a record 11.4 million barrels of bourbon aging in Kentucky. Do you think supply will outdo demand in the next few years?
Well, I do think it'll depend on the company, right? So for us, we're pretty fortunate that we don't really export hardly anything. I mean, we do export a small volume, but the majority, 90+% of our production is U.S. Bound. So we have a kind of a focus on so hopefully someday be more global and grow that. So the upside for us is there, and some of our competitors might be more like 50-50. So it's a little harder for them to get that expansion out there. So we just invested $200 million on our distillery, and we think that the future still looks pretty bright, at least for the next few years. And the globe is just as thirsty as we are. So we've got to, we got to kind of, keep up with production.
Awesome. Tom Burns asks, he basically wants to know, as far as, do you feel that the secondary bourbon market is helping the whiskey industry or hurting the whiskey industry?
Well, it definitely increases chatter, but it's never been a good thing. I don't think to especially the high prices generally. One of the things we have figured out is people are charging more than we recommend, and that's not fair because that's not what it costs to make the bottle, right? It's just not what we suggested to sell for. So for us, I don't think it's a healthy thing to, for people to be capitalizing on the, people's demand for the products. But it definitely increases chatter. So there's, sometimes people say, bad publicity is good publicity. I don't know. I go both ways on it.
Awesome. Harlan, well, thank you so much. I'm just going to recap all our questions from our audience, and then if you would do the honors of choosing your favorite 2 questions, and then I will have the villain's job of choosing who gets the, both great prizes tonight. Both people are getting a barrelhead signed by Harlan, which is an absolutely killer prize. But the first place winner will get that extra swag bag. So I'll be the villain there, Harlan, as far as picking the best, my favorite of the 2. But just a quick recap of the questions we had. Out of all your bourbons, which is the most underrated? We had the question about the expansion, and is that going to increase the harder to find products, or will it just be Eagle Rare and Buffalo Trace? We had the question about you being a Kentucky native and what you like about giving back to the community. We had the question about poor man's pappy being a good or positive thing, or a good or negative thing. We had the question about going through here. The culture of Buffalo Trace. What would you say you guys are about as a company, apart from your whiskeys? We had the question about the experimental process and what are the most recent, and what would you say have been the most impactful over the years? We had the question about Weller being a wheated bourbon. Has it driven more whiskeys in that direction? We had what's your favorite part of your job? We had the question about the music, the music aged whiskey. We had the question about the expansion of a record 11.4 million barrels and the supply versus the demand. And then we had the question about the secondary market. So sorry, there's quite a bit to remember there. I don't know if any 2 stood out to you.
They were all really good, really great questions. I mean, informed, and I think doing the homework on the 11 million is probably worth one. And then I like the culture question a lot, because I think it's important for everybody to understand, kind of what Sazerac and Buffalo Trace stand for and our products. And that's a really good question. So, and I think you should do that with all your products, not just what we're selling. So
yeah,
I like those 2.
Making my job tough here. Not that the culture thing wasn't an amazing question, because I always love hearing that question, but it has been asked on calls before. And so I think I'm going to give the first place to Drew Hall, who asked the question about the 11.4 million barrels. So congratulations, Drew. You'll be getting that signed barrelhead and that swag bag. We will reach out to you to get that information. And then Brian Yardley, you will also be getting a signed barrelhead from Harlan as the second place winner. So thank you everyone for your questions. Again, we never have enough time to answer or ask everyone's questions, but we try our best to get to the ones we feel are best in the moment. So thank you to all our members for being members and supporting the Whiskey Club. And we love doing this. We love introducing you to great whiskeys. And obviously the Weller pick this month was one of the standouts of the year. I think everyone can agree. So Harlan, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a good night. Cheers.
All right. Thank you.